as Adam, as earthlings, and Chava, the life force. We don't have proper names in the creation story. We are the dimensions of earth. It's like humus and humus, right? And Chava, we call Eve, but Chava, her Hebrew name, means the force of life, the dynamic of life. Right? So what a combination of those two. And as we reflect on that, what does it mean to do teshuvah, to make our daily world more alive and more earth-connected? For much of Yom Kippur, as is our commitment as a spiritually activist community, we have and will raise our collective conscience in regard to a variety of systemic and global issues of the well-being of this planet and justice in our time. That is part of our mission in this world. At the same time, if we only focus on our pursuit of justice, we can evade one of the most profound meanings of this day, which is to examine and be accountable for the purpose, values, and beliefs that we hold on to that fuel these acts of tikkun in the world. As Bob Zimmerman once chanted, "You gotta serve somebody," right? We all do in some way. If you want to know what someone really believes, Kaplan would say, look at the outcome of their belief. He would say, if you've davened on Shabbat, that's great, but I want to see who you are as you leave the synagogue and go into life, and that will tell me if you believe what you've prayed. So I'm both a mystic and a pragmatist as I get older, that I love these concepts, they bring me alive, but I recognize that it's more I need to look at myself and what I do, not just statements of belief, because our kids will certainly say that, and we reflect that back to each other in life as well. And we know the disjunct, even with fake news and social media lies. So to whom does it concern, this book of life that we are writing? If you think of the foreword to your own book of life, would you fill in to? To whom, to what does it concern? To God, to self, to truth, to the universe? Who are you writing this book of life to? And who are we sending this life letter to? So I invite you to join with me, even just for a few minutes, to consider these things. I mentioned on Rosh Hashanah the words of Esau Macaulay, a religious studies professor who wrote the book Reading While Black, African-American Biblical Interpretation as an Exercise in Hope. And one of his statements have stuck with me. What is it about this past year and a half, and what is it in life that wakes us from our slumber and changes us forever? That is actually the goal, not a byproduct, the goal of Yom Kippur. And so exploring our deep narratives and ultimate truths feels especially poignant right now, as we as a community of around 220 plus households, all of you joining us on Zoom, our new digital and online members as well, as we enter our 34th year of existence, as we are truly becoming a multi-generational community for the first time in our history. Rabbi Yael, as she mentioned, as Steve mentioned, is embarking on the next stage of her journey after 4 SHMITA cycles of serving the only community she's ever served as a student rabbi and a rabbi, or at least as a rabbi, being Mishkan Shalom. And here I am, just having signed a SHMITA year new contract with the support of all of you and the board as well, to enter and extend the next stage of our journey together. We've celebrated babies and now increasingly grandbabies. The first one is one thing, I mean, I'm in the position of 2 that's about to double in this coming year as well. And I've watched some of our members go from the joy of going 1 or 2 days a week for the one to suddenly having to reapportion their retirement in life as those numbers start to increase as well. And at the same time, so many of our parents, and yes, even some of our own members, have begun to leave this world. And I raise this because I want us to be prepared that it's not something tragic that's happening to us, even though a loss may feel that way. It's actually that we're finally in the natural course of life as a community, and entering a multi-generational state. And being aware of that and preparing for that on this day that invites us to taste our mortality is a really important practice. A great spiritual issue of this day beckons us to engage. Can we be with the self in the mirror without averting our gaze? Who am I? What is my purpose in this lifetime? And simultaneously deal with what our truth is about who is looking back in that mirror. Mark Singer, in a beautiful book called The Untethered Soul, said, have you ever wondered who the you is that is wondering about who the you is? That is the you that is not just your personality. That is the cosmos of the you, or the B'Tselem Elohim, or the Nitzutz, the spark of the divine, whatever your theology or philosophy is, that's actually considering your very existence while you wrestle with it. And if you can catch that moment and say, wow, right? Like one of our Brit Mitzvah did with me one day when we were talking about their Parsha, and they shared something, and they went, I have never had a thought like that before. Do people have these type of thoughts? Is this possible? And in that moment, I felt her bat mitzvah occurred, right? That she become aware of her awareness. Right? That, for me, is the taste of what we might call divine. Right? And yet Yom Kippur asks us to review this book of our lives. Which chapters move the protagonist forward into an ever-evolving, more fully realized, upgraded micro-soul chip? And which have kept us frozen, stuck, locked in, or as Rabbi Mordecai Kaplan said, that Steve quoted me of lifting up the other day, are we stuck in pediatric religion and belief? X happened when I was 7. They told me about God there, and it didn't manifest when I was 12. This happened yesterday, and I believed up until that day, and now I can't believe anymore if it's not so. Those understandings of God as a noun do not ultimately serve us in my experience, which is often painfully earned in the vicissitudes of life, not because I've ingested a theology that gets me through every occasion. So maybe as we're going through these Yom Kippur days, we might feel inspired, we might run into concepts, theist, atheist, whatever our vantage point. I'm actually inviting us to even be the you that's not just the you who has a belief, the you that exists beyond that narrative, and see if you can taste that and what that reveals to you this day. As Reconstructionists, we refuse to justify or explain the suffering of the innocent as punishment or as a test from God. We reject the idea that every misfortune is a just punishment for some misdeed on this day. And yet we rehearse and we own these words because we know, like our ancestors, or even our parents and grandparents, that we come face to face with the deepest mysteries of life. Things happen in this world that do not make sense and shatter our hearts and ideas of what must be so. And I find myself more often these days saying, I don't know the answer. I am with you. I train spiritual directors in a 3-year program. I serve here at Mishkan Shalom. I co-run a 2-year Prayer Leaders Institute. The only way I've been able to keep doing those things with integrity is to keep asking myself, who am I? And what belief is serving? And to whom am I serving? Otherwise, it just becomes a matter of words, disconnected words. And I don't accept that life is simply a series of unrelated events, a series of accidents in which we play no part and exert no influence. Something in me wonders and marvels at the beauty that is also this existence, and sees patterns of energy and circumstance flowing like an ocean current that can enable us to see coherence and live a life of meaning, love, and purpose amidst the chaos of life. And that means being present to suffering and increasingly reality as it is, and not just as I wish it would be, even at the same time that I join with you and to activate for change, to not just simply take it the way it is. For me, that's part of my evolving experience of God. And as I look around here and see some of our recent B'nai B'tei Mitzvah, and those who may be over 12 who are coming up in the queue as well, that's half of my conversation with those young people, and probably with many of you, if you book some time as well. They come in, and half of them say, I don't know if I should be doing this. I don't really believe in the whole package deal, this God thing. And as I learned from Reb Zalman and try to say to him, ask myself, I say, tell me about the God you don't believe in. Tell me about the bar bat mitzvah that you can't even imagine having right now. And then the conversation goes from there. And so often the second conversation has more enthusiasm and connection. And I remember one day asking one of our B'nai Mitzvah who came bounding into the room after a first meeting, which was filled with, I don't get this, I want to own my resistance, I don't believe any of this stuff, whatever it is, came bounding in and said, let's get to work. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. As your rabbi, can we just pause there for a moment? Because I don't want you to swing the other way and think you got to please me or your parents and suddenly be over enthusiastic. And they said, you know what, it's just because you didn't get angry and you listened to me, I started to rethink my stance. For me, that is God in what we call God in that moment. Nothing I have to defend or invite people to or missionize. It is reality in life itself, longing for meaning and purpose. As the Catholic theologian Thomas Merton said, of blessed memory, you can always tell the insecurity of someone's belief by the loudness with which they proclaim it. I notice for our young people and so many, and for our allies, or those of us that may be white, if you're working multi-faith, multiracial places, that nothing I've said has ever been quoted back to me. It's because the way I or we have shown up. It's that people come to Mishkan and they feel safe and at home. That's how they feel God is in this place. Not because we have good pronouncements about dismantling white supremacy or ending racism, but because of the felt experience of those motions. So as I mentioned in Rosh Hashanah, I won't wax on too much more. I hope. There's lots more pages here, but I'm not going to read all of these things. I'm already getting tired of myself. Just some, little snapshot. Are you with me? Are you feel connected to what's being said? Okay. All right. And what I'm hoping is you're starting to see yourself too. And where am I in relationship to this? How is this living inside of me? Right. So it was important for me to name some of my struggles on Rosh Hashanah, fueled by, I have to sometimes use the fact that other people are benefiting from something for me to let go a little bit more and feel like it's okay. So once I started to hear that other clergy colleagues were, when I said I'm struggling with this or I'm dealing with, not always feeling up or feeling exhausted and mentally, and I can't do Zoom meetings after 7 anymore, was greeted by, wow, I feel so much better about myself because I project onto you that you got it all under in your faith and your whatever else is carrying you through this time. I'm saying no, gam ki elach begetzel mavet. Even though I walk through the valley of shadows, I will take my fear and I will keep an eye out for you. Not just, here's the magic formula and I skip over it. No, part of that is going into these depths. Right? Now, when I was younger, I felt God's presence as Abba, as Father, as all around, all the time. My real bar mitzvah didn't happen in a synagogue. I only did half a haftorah, and my bar mitzvah tutor ate onions before the lessons and breathed heavily on me. That's what I remember from that process. And we had a little bit of a party. My friends started joking when my grandfather was doing the Birkat HaMazon. I got really angry with them, because I loved my grandfather. My dad had a little bit too much to drink. He broke up my party in the basement when someone was doing handwriting analysis, sent everyone home. That's that aspect of the B'nai Mitzvah, right? But what I do remember was being out, and this is for me SHMITA consciousness. After all of that happened, being out in a field of snow in Toronto and seeing the sun bounce off the icy coverage and just falling into the snow, overwhelmed by the magnitude of being alive at all, and feeling embraced by the universe. For me, that was the moment that I became a bar mitzvah. That's what I hold on to. But in the vicissitudes of life, relationships happening, marriage for life not being so, and very blessedly on the second iteration and learning a lot from the first, being a step-parent twice over now and grandparent as well, longing for biological children and going through multiple miscarriages, finding that very lonely as a man, in the absence of literature or even conversations about that, and looking at Steve, and thank God for our men's group, one of the only places that I felt I could go with trying to understand that experience. That idea of God felt like it was being burnt off me, almost like the returning rocket to the planet and the fuselage, or in order to get to the next place, the rocket has to drop everything that got it to that place, or it would simply get pulled back down by the gravity of life itself. So part of the SHMITA consciousness in the psycho-spiritual realm is, what do we need to let go of that got us to this point, that got us to this point, that would drag us back down if we didn't heed the call and let it go. And I remember, this is a story I've told before, remember once being in the company of another colleague who was leading prayers and invited us into Psalm 27 and quoted the end, said, step into this psalm, keep hope in God, trust in, and you will always be okay. And I just started weeping. I said, if I'm to genuinely have a connection with whatever you are, or whoever I am in my truth in this moment, I can't buy that program anymore. I am not going to step into that. That would be a lie. And in my own mind, I was like having this whole dialogue until I suddenly bumped into a bookshelf, right? And in front of my nose on that shelf was the Book of Psalms, classic rabbinic interpretations. I said, okay, interesting move, right? But I still don't buy it. Like that's, I'll throw the staff down, it'll turn into the snake, but the Egyptians could do the same thing. So it's a nice parlor trick. So I took the book out though, and I just did one of those, I'll open it to see wherever it unfolds to. And there was Psalm 27, the one that I had been invited into. And I said, okay, that's a next level, not bad, but I'm not going to be magically wooed into this old theology that no longer is true in my own heart. And then I read below the line to the rabbinic commentary, and it stayed with me to this day. The rabbi said, how can we say these words when we have witnessed the destruction of our people, and that the truth is that much of what we pray for never happens in our lifetime? What is this hope that's being spoken of? And then they answered their own question and said, the hope is that by hoping in and of itself and having faith, we will never end up feeling ashamed or embarrassed for having hoped at all. And that has stayed with me now, that the very exercise of hoping, not the production or the answering of exactly what I'm praying for, but even having the courage to write the first word. I rarely journal these days, because often I have to fight some sense of, who's reading this? Like, for whom is this? And how many pages and pages were written about all these other things? And then I find the exercise is sometimes to say to and fill in the blank in one sentence. And that moves me past the place, just to even step into and put a couple of words on that page. So being exposed to all these different theologies and philosophies, liberation theology, process theology, whatever your philosophy is, right? I want to invite us not to get stuck in the God, no God thing, because either piece may be the fuselage that's keeping us dragged down. Maybe the baggage attached to the car, even if it's a Toyota Prius or an electric, right? But we're still schlepping this stuff around, and we're wondering, why am I not up to speed in life? Because listen for all that clanking of the bags that are being dragged around behind you, that we need to sever those ideas. It may be the profound agnostic or atheist in us that is going to be a little bit open to some meaning that we've always resisted, or the sure ones in us and the certainty that's going to, this year and SHMITA year, may be open to not knowing or confusion, or maybe not having the answer, or simply saying, I don't even know what to say to you when you've lost all these people to COVID or your job or whatever, but you just call me anytime and I'm going to walk with you. That is what I would say is God as in action. that word. We have over 100 names for the divine in our tradition. Adonai, that's just one of them, Lord, Master. I'm using that. I'm kind of bringing that back these days. I found one day I was with my spiritual director in my monthly session, because one can't offer that to someone without being in it. And emerged this idea of God as Father. And I said to them, I don't know if I can say this anymore because I think I let that go. And she blessedly said, if that's what's in your heart right now, offer that prayer. And again, my heart just broke open, right? Because in that moment, I needed to claim that aspect of the divinity. And had I denied myself, I would have closed the door to what was needed in that moment. And maybe it's the no God. And maybe it's remembering that God comes from the German Gott, which means to evoke and call forth. So that God is a verb and not a noun. And we create idols when we make God a thing as opposed to a process, energy, dynamic, whether that's a being or a becoming for whatever it may be. These are the things that I want to claim in the SHMITA year, regardless of what the philosophy is. I know this can be dislocating and upending. I'm sure SHMITA year in biblical times was no cakewalk. Oh my God, now the 7th year we have to now with the land and with this and the triplicates and whatever it may be, right? But living in this gap and trying to believe that we have been given a moment of grace, some of the many things that you in the room and on Zoom just mentioned, can break us free of the loops of unconscious patterns. So Godding becomes a state of action as opposed to a thing or a system we do or don't believe in. In Kabbalah, this is referred to as returning the klipot to their original form, allowing reality to come back to its essential way of being. Now, many of us buckle against this, right? But I will tell you a profound moment that I had just a little over a year ago, and this is one of those rabbinic. I will be coming in for a landing soon, so there's at least 40 more minutes before but it is coming to an end soon. The moment of being with so many of us in this room at funerals, passages of time, and then my time came unexpectedly. My dad dying much earlier than we expected, though in many ways, thankfully, not spending years deteriorating in Alzheimer's. But I wasn't able to get there for the funeral, but at least we had Zoom. And then we started the Zoom and no sound. And the funeral or cemetery hadn't tested it because they'd never had a problem before. They usually just hit on and it's good to go. And in that moment, I felt my heart shattering, going this cannot be happening. I didn't want to be in relationship with reality. And Simcha, bless her, said, should I go upstairs? We can do our own thing. Let's be at the graveside and we'll do the same thing parallel. And I had that moment where I said, is this the God I want to lean into right now? I might have said yes in the past, but I said, no, wait, just let me be a little bit longer with the heartbreak. And let me call out to my dad. And suddenly I felt him all around me. He wasn't even at his own funeral. Well, his body was. But I felt him making the decision to put his hand on me and be with me as we were watching him being put in the earth. And had I moved quickly to get out of that state, called on God to free me from that place, I would have missed my dad. And I call on him regularly now. Right? Sometimes his painting little picture of him falls over and crashes down on the floor, and he wants me to pay a little bit more attention, right? But mostly, when I'm feeling his loss, I call on him, and I suddenly feel his presence in my heart. And so I didn't call on the God of miracles or to make the sound better or let's do the alternate ritual. It was being where the place of heartbreak was, where the imperfection is, where the light can shine through. That was my experience of what I used to call God beforehand. So this meaning-making process impels us to instinctively seek out connections, to create and sustain memories, to rewrite our life scripts and make a new story over and over again out of the ashes and the mulch of life as it has been. So what will we do with this year ahead? How will we be in our psycho-spiritual belief systems? What do we need to shed, to let fallow, to let go of so we can loosen the grip? As I said to my spiritual director, this feels like a dichotomy. I feel God is asking me to let God go so that God could be freed from the God that is oppressed by the God concept that I've had up until now. And my spiritual director said, yes. If you have faith, you will not hold on to a God that no longer serves, because then you are not serving that God. You will step into this unknown and trust that the unknown place is the bridge that's unfolding before you. And so I'm going to quote in actual conclusion as we enter into the Torah service a couple of our own members. These are words that they may be appalled that I've held on to for years now, but I do remember them and I wrote them down. Margaret Bradley wrote, "Do we each extend ourselves as best and lovingly as we can is a question I can mull over, much better than whether I will be written into any book of life. That part of the writing is the part we get to do." And Steve Newman, hey Steve-O, in one of my favorite stories, you said at one point, Donald Barthelme's The School, the class is afflicted by an absurd string of deaths. COVID age, anybody? Pets, parents, kids. And the anguished student asks the teacher, is death that which gives meaning to life? And the teacher says, no, life is what gives meaning to life. So on this day, this Yom Kippur day, I pray that these words, and we'll take a moment just to sit in quiet to see where they have landed for you, will enable you to go a little bit further along this road. And as the liturgy works through you, as the names we use, whatever it is, just look around the block. I cannot tell you how many people I have sat with in over 20 years of being a spiritual director who have come in and said, I feel I'm up against a wall. I feel I get to a place and there's a fence separating me and God and life and purpose. And I mean, the first thing for me is to say, describe the fence, describe the wall. I remember somebody saying, I feel like I'm in a desert. And I was saying, tell me about the desert. And suddenly there was a bench, and the person found themselves sitting on the bench. And then they looked around and they felt God's presence was sitting next to them, holding their hand and saying, I can't get you out of here, but I'm not going to leave you alone in this place. And keep asking those questions, because the fact that you're feeling a headache when you hit your head against the wall may be meaning that you don't need to hit your head against the wall anymore, as opposed to how do I break through? There may be a door. Or as Rumi once said, they say the eyes are the windows to the soul. But if there's no door between us and no wall, who even needs windows? So may you be strengthened by these words, and as we take this moment to prepare ourselves for receiving Torah, just see in the quiet of your own heart, the chatters may have the opportunity to put something in the chat. What struck you, what's sitting with you in this moment in time. I'm not going to ask us to say anything out loud right now, but just to be with your own heart and see what's resonating in the tuning fork of your own soul with what I've shared today. I'm going to listen to.